I always like to start these knowledge webinars by saying two things. There's two things in this life that people can give each other that are so valuable. And it's kind of our mantra on these webinars. And the two things are your time and your knowledge. And so our guest today, Todd Janzen, is doing both of those with us. And thank you all who are participating on this call for your time. I truly believe that in life. Everything would be a lot better if we just spent more time and knowledge and shared knowledge back and forth with each other. So thank you for that, Todd. And I'm going to introduce you. And if I miss anything here, just jump right in and say, no, that's not correct. But Todd is the president of Janzen Schroeder Agricultural Law in the great state of Indiana, based in Indianapolis. He grew up on a farm in Kansas. I think that already gives him some street cred, right? So he knows the issues and challenges and opportunities in agriculture that are out there. He's dedicated his efforts to the legal needs of the entire agricultural industry, and thank you for that, Todd. I mean, that's much appreciated, and it's a great industry to be giving of one's professional and life to. You represent farmers, ag tech providers, and ag businesses. Yeah, from Todd's perspective, I called him up one day. I said, Todd, this is Ron Dunker from Oaken. Would you do a webinar? The guy didn't even hardly hesitate. He was like, yeah, absolutely. I'll do it with you. So that's the kind of guy we have on this webinar today. So, man, I feel fortunate that he does a lot to navigate the intersection of law, technology, agriculture. He works with clients and publishes topics on ag, technology, big data, robotics, AI, which is a huge topic, contracts, which we here at Oaken, that's our lifeblood and what we do every day and help our clients and customers with. Real estate, environmental compliance, business consulting. He's pretty versed in the how long have you been doing this, Todd? I didn't ask you that.
Oh boy. You got to make me think about it long enough that I can't just tell you off the
There
top of
you
my
go. That's
head.
that's a perfect answer. That's a long time, right?
Yeah,
Feels like yesterday, but it's been a long time.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And he's helped the industry. He administers, we were just talking about this at the very beginning, but he administers a really cool project. And if you want more information, I'd encourage you to reach out to Todd about ag data and the transparency in ag data. That's been a huge topic, for the last 15, 20 years, I guess, or more with in agriculture. Really when they started to bring in digitization into agriculture more, this has been a huge topic, and he administers a project around that and works diligently to see what people are doing with your data from a grower standpoint, and he publishes that, which awesome work in that regard. He's a graduate of the Indiana Agricultural Leadership Program. He serves as the chair of the ABA Agricultural Management Committee and was the chair of the Indiana Ag Law section. You can find information on him at his website is aglaw.us. So, did I miss anything, Todd?
No. I think that really hits it all. I mean, most of my work is just providing legal help to farmers, mostly in, the Midwest, but occasionally elsewhere. So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for that. And so we're just gonna, kind of jump right into it, and again, if you want to ask a question, feel free to jump in. Todd's we'll spend about 35, 40 minutes on these topic, or during this webinar, and if there's a burning question out there, you've got some free legal advice here, some pro bono work as they call it in the industry. But I'll start with the basics. And I'd asked Todd earlier, what topics are kind of top of mind with you as you think about contracts, leasing, and we're going to start with what he said. He goes, the advantage of a written lease versus a verbal lease, right, or an oral lease. And I can tell you this from learning from our customers and working with a wide customer base across the United States in helping them manage the leasing process and digitizing that with their growers or with their landlords. There are still a fair share of written leases or oral leases out there. So can you elaborate on, what you find or what the advantage of a written lease is versus an oral?
Yeah, it really comes down to what happens when things go wrong. And if you have an oral lease, it can be quite a challenge sometimes to figure out what did we really agree on.
Yeah.
If you have a written lease, it should be much clearer. Now, it doesn't mean a written lease is always going to be crystal clear, but certainly more clear. And
Hmm.
when you come to a lawyer and you need help with a lease issue, if it's an oral lease, that can make it pretty challenging for us because then we're not just dealing with trying to sort out what's the legal ramification of a term, but what is the actual term itself. And if the parties can't agree, then you've got a factual dispute, and that just makes it so much more complicated. So I would say if you want it to be enforceable, go written. It's much better, much clearer.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any legal precedent for that oral lease is binding in any way, shape, or form? I guess that would be my question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say I'm speaking from the Indiana perspective here because that's the law
Right.
I'm most familiar with. But an oral lease is absolutely going to be enforceable if it's for a short term. In Indiana, I believe it's if it's greater than 3 years, it has to be written to be enforceable. Don't quote me on that, but I think
Right.
that's generally true in other states too. That um, we will enforce, courts will enforce oral agreements. But if they become long term, then you start to get into what we call a statute of frauds problem. Because we don't want somebody to show up in court and say, yeah, when somebody dies, right? Well, we agreed on a oral contract 10 years
Yep.
ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I would venture to say that there's probably are 10-year oral agreements out there. Would you not?
yeah, probably so. And so I would say don't assume that they're unenforceable just because they're an oral agreement. But the presumption definitely is not going to be as strong as if it's in written form.
Yeah, for sure. So your recommendation based off that is anything over 3 years, you better get it down in writing. If I'm interpreting what you're saying.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And well,
Yeah.
I'd actually say even a 1 year lease, get it in writing.
Yeah. 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 Well, I just heard this recently as well, working with some customers is like, well, the guy doesn't want to do a written lease, or the family, I shouldn't say guy, I said the family doesn't want to do a written lease. What do you do then?
If you want to farm the ground and the landlord isn't willing to do a written lease, I think at that point you just agree to an oral lease and know it could just be for 1 year because there's no guarantee it's going to continue on the second year. Maybe maybe there's a way to verify that oral lease, right? If it's
Yeah.
somebody who is emailing with you, you could say, okay, we don't need to do a lease, but here's my understanding of what the terms are, and send that to them in an email. And presumably they'll respond and say, okay. And so you've at least got a paper trail there.
Gotcha.
Um, it's not an official lease. And but you've got some paper trail to look back on if there is a dispute down the road.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Okay, so making sure you have some form of a paper trail and email is
Yeah.
acceptable.
And I
Okay.
think you could do the same too if you've got somebody who doesn't email and doesn't want to do a written lease. You could at least jot down on paper and say, okay, these are what I understand the terms to be, and
Mhm.
give that to them or send that to them as a in the mail or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, generally the law will say, like, if you get something in the mail that says, hey, you signed this contract and you don't say anything in response, there's at least a presumption that that's probably correct. Now, you can dispute that, but
Right.
that's why anytime you get a letter that says you owe money, you need to dispute that if you don't owe the money, because otherwise it could be presumed to be an accurate accounting of a debt.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense. And so, not to get too spun around the axle on this, but just having the experience of, so what a lot of our customers will do is they'll take the information and put it into like our Oaken, contract lease management system that we have. But and the reason why they do that is not, I don't think, from a contractual legal binding standpoint. It's just so the next generation has that kind of information of what that, the terms or the rough agreements are, the handshake agreements are around that. So unless somehow that individual that you're leasing the land from has that paper trail in hand, they would have, that there would have to be another step there, I guess, is what I'm thinking, to have to make sure that it's got some standing in legal recourse, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Fair. All right. Well, good stuff. Hey, I'm gonna just pause after every kind of topic here and see if there's any questions from anybody on the call. And feel free to type something in the chat. I'll see if there's anything here in the chat. I don't see anything yet, but feel free to do that. All right. So, as you think about leases, and boy, they are all over the place. We often get the requests and the ask of our customers, and we always try to service and provide everything that our customer needs, to make sure that they're successful. But they say, well, can you do a template for us, a lease template? And we can, but what are the basics that you would say are needed when let's say you're drawing up a lease for the first time, or maybe you want to change your leasing. Maybe they're just all over the place and you're trying to standardize your leasing processes. What would you say are the basics that are needed?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say there's probably five essential things you absolutely want to have in a lease. And so some of these may seem obvious, but they're a little more nuanced if you really think about it. So I'd say one is who's the landlord and who's the tenant. And it's surprising to me how often people actually get this wrong because they'll say, the landlord is John Smith. But it's actually not John Smith because John Smith doesn't own the land. It's owned by the John C. Smith Memorial Family
Ah,
Trust, right?
right.
So get the actual landowner down, and the same with the tenant, right? Not just the tenant farmer's name, but if it's a corporation LLC, who that is.
Yep.
So that's one thing. I'd say describing the property would be the second thing. It's surprising to me how many times this is not adequately done. And I'm not saying you need the formal meets and bounds, but
Yep.
you've got to have some way to describe the property. We've had people come to us and say, hey, the landlord won't renew this, and we're past the renewal date, but there's no description of the property in that. So that can be a problem. You want to say too, I'd say the third thing would be how long is the lease? 1 year, multiple years, and then what's the renewal process at the end of that term? Like
Mhm.
here in Indiana, if a lease doesn't say anything about renewal, then the landowner has 90 days before the end of the term to notify that farmer that they're not going to renew, or it will automatically renew. And so that becomes a
Yeah.
big problem for a lot of people who try to, terminate a lease on December 31st because it's too late
Yep.
often at that point. So that's another thing. Of course, how you're calculating rent, that'd be the fourth thing I would say is an absolute basic element you have to have in a contract. What is the rent? When's it supposed to be paid? And how's that calculated? And then the last thing would be some form of agreement that is a manifestation of the acceptance of the contract. And so something
Yep.
where people sign it that they are acknowledging this is what we've agreed to. So if you have
Yep.
those five things, we can work with you. If you're missing any one of those, then it's really a big question of enforceability.
Yep. Okay. So that's pretty basic. Those are pretty basic
Yeah.
items. I think that's good recommendation to get the name right, the LLC name or whatever that is. I'm sure you see that all the time. Well, it's the Smith family or the Jones family, right? It's Mary and Tom Jones, right? Well, that's not their trust or name or whatever it is that they've set up, right, for
Yeah,
their assets.
and people may or may not know this, but if land is owned by a husband and wife, generally speaking, just one of them doesn't have the power to convey a lease or the property without the consent of the other. And so, right, if just the husband signs the lease,
Right.
it may not actually be valid if the wife is also a co-owner of that property and she doesn't sign it. So that's an
Yeah.
issue. And then anyone who does a lot of work in farming knows that there's a lot of land out there that's owned by, let's say, four siblings who inherited it, and they each
Yep.
own an undivided 1/4 of the whole property. So they all have
Yep.
to consent too if that's how it's owned.
Okay. So they all they so okay, yeah, so that would mean that if they have, let's say, trusts set up individually for their own families, every all four of those in that example you use, they would have to that trust their individual trust names would have to be on top of that lease agreement, correct?
If they would set
If
up,
they're all equal owners or something of that nature, right?
yeah, if they set up a trust to own their share, I guess
Yeah.
if that's what you're saying, yes, then
Mhm.
that trust would have to sign off on it. And usually for a trust, you're going to have one trustee who represents that trust who can sign things, right? Or maybe
Right.
co-trustees.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. One of the things that we do a lot of and is that helps streamline efficiencies as well is the use of a digital signature, right? And we talked about this before everybody jumped on, but what's your thoughts around digital signature, legal binding, precedent around that? Is there, is it a federal precedent? Is there states that have different rules? What's your thoughts around electronic signatures after you to help with those 4, 5, 6 people that you have to get those documents
yeah.
signed by, right? Here's put them in the mailbox, right? Here we go. Put them, drive into the mail, right? Making sure that
Yep.
it's a trackable package that they receive it. That can get really expensive really quick. So electronic signatures, what's your thought on that? What I kind of said earlier.
Yeah, I would say in general, and there are certainly exceptions, in general, an electronic signature is going to be treated as just as valid as a wet signature.
Hmm.
And that's because, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years ago, there was a federal act that said that we're not going to deny the enforceability of contracts simply because the signature is in digital format. And so there's federal law that recognizes that. And then there was a Uniform Electronic Transactions Act that was passed or that was promulgated out there, and states could adopt it if they wanted to. And I think most states or all states have adopted this, which also says that we're not going to deny the legality or the enforceability of a contract simply because it was in electronic format,
Okay.
signed electronically. So those DocuSign that you get are generally going to
Yeah.
be enforceable. The exceptions, I don't want to say always because there are exceptions, right? Like you in Indiana, for example, you could not deed property to somebody using a digital signature because we
Yeah.
have a attestation requirement, a notary requirement. Same with things like probably wills and trusts, things where you want to have a representative there to witness you sign it. So there are a lot of exceptions, but in general, digital signatures work and are enforceable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Is there any questions for Todd thus far, or anything we talked about, or anything that's burning in your mind that you would like to ask? You can come off mute. I don't see anything in the chat. Don't believe I'm seeing the whole
There,
thing.
I see one from Shashi.
Okay. Yeah,
Maybe
what do you have? What does it say there? I'm not seeing it.
can you give an example of a case that's gone wrong? The worst case scenario for the farmers and landowners when terms are not negotiated or understood correctly.
Okay. There it is. Okay, yeah. I see it now.
Um, yeah, I would say it seems like the worst case scenario for a lot of farmers is when suddenly they find out that the land is going to be leased to someone else, and here they thought, oh, let's say that the father who owned all the land said, "Yeah, I'll lease it to you for 10 years." And a year later, he dies and passes the land on to his son and daughter. And the son and daughter say, "Hey, we don't want this farmer farming this land for the next 10 years." And
Yeah.
so, you know, we're gonna not renew this lease for next year, and that farmer comes to us and says, "Hey, but I have a 10-year agreement with dad before he died." And I mean, if it's just an oral agreement, he's pretty much out of luck. In a state like Indiana, we're not going to recognize a 10-year oral agreement because you could see it'd be really easy for somebody to fabricate that if they wanted to, or maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't crystal clear. um, so we see that a lot too, where somebody dies and it's not real clear what the terms of the deal were, and so that farmer or landowner is going to be at the mercy of the new landowners.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'll take that even one step further. And that thanks for sharing that, Todd. I'm literally having a conversation with and showing Oaken to someone later today. I had a conversation with him last week, and he said I had a verbal agreement with an individual, and a simple thing like he wants me to notify when I'm getting ready to harvest his field, and I forgot to notify him. He goes, I almost lost that lease by not notifying him. So that goes to what I think of as it goes to the need of having something written down that, you need
Yeah,
to notify this individual at, November 1st, so that they know you're getting ready to go harvest their field. But that's just a small case of probably many that are out there that things happen like that because everybody's busy and everybody's trying to hustle to,
yeah,
work around weather and environment and all those other things. But that's a perfect example, right, of
yeah,
those. So
yep,
perfect. Well, thanks for
absolutely.
sharing that. Any questions? I heard somebody earlier. Was there a question out there from anybody for Todd? So while they're thinking about that, how do you feel about uh, I don't want to call them infinity leases, but leases that carry on for a long time, like, for decades. And it makes it simpler, right, for the tenant or the person who's farming that, but and it certainly makes it easy for the family. But is there any legal advice that you give for people that have these? I don't want to say they're infinity leases, but I'm just using that's my term, not a term I've
Right.
heard. I just
Yeah.
made that up actually. But these long-term, ongoing leases. What's your thoughts around those?
Yeah, you could certainly do that. I think it can be a little bit of a challenge with respect to farmland, and because people can die, farms can go out of business, land can change hands, so that can be a little bit of a challenge, I would say, to go out more than 10 years. I mean, we have seen it with respect to some renewable energy projects like solar lease,
Mm,
or wind leases. Those can be 20, 50 years. And so then I think the big issue becomes in those really long-term leases, what's the escalator of the rent? How much is it going to go up every year of the term? Because the value of money 50 years from now could be wildly different than it is today, right? And so you don't want to uh, have let's say, a 1 or 2% escalator built into a contract, and meanwhile, for 20 years, inflation runs at 4 or 5%. That's going to be
right.
a pretty significant decrease in the amount of actual rent you're being paid over the life of that lease.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to know. Another thing that we see a lot of is, I think it goes probably to making sure that everything is documented correctly and being able to share that information, with all the landowners. The problem that Oaken is trying to solve is really this land transition that's happening right now and for the next 20 years, right? And this this ability to maintain land for the grower and keep it in their control, but then how do you interact effectively and efficiently with these 4 to 5 different landowners, right? And you talked about some of those pinch points. So the thing that I I always am curious about is the fact that having do you see a lot? I guess my question is, are you seeing a lot of disagreements that are happening with leasing now that this land is transitioning from, let's say, mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, and now transitioning to the kids or the nieces and nephews or whoever those are? Are you finding that there's more like issues with, the leasing processes with these new landowners, multiple landowners managing the, same amount of land that grandma and grandpa did, but are you seeing a lot of that come through the door,
Yeah, I
or
mean, I think
inquiries?
yeah, I think you definitely see disputes between heirs over what to do with land that they've inherited, and a lot of times mom and dad will try to resolve that in advance, but once they're gone, it can be a real challenge when
Mhm.
siblings can't agree on what to do with property. And I think what's probably changed or made that a little bit worse in the last few years is that the value of farmland has increased so much. And you also have a lot of competing uses for farmland now. And so when you have one sibling that says, I really want to honor mom and dad's legacy and keep this land as tillable for the next
Yeah.
20 years, and then you've got Amazon.com saying we want to build a warehouse on that property or a data center, and we're going to give you $50,000 an acre, or, and I'm pulling a number out of the sky to just show it's a lot of money. And that can create a lot of tension between heirs and siblings. And so we do get involved in those kind of disputes. And that probably is going to get worse, I think, in the next 10 years as we see a lot of land transition hands and we see an enormous amount of demand for use of farmland right now, not just for farming, but other things as well.
Yeah, I was just out in Indiana not that long ago, and I know the case where there's a lot of discussion around the use of farmland and the use of for data centers and those sort of things. So I do remember that. We're getting some good questions in now, so let's keep this rolling here. So one of the questions is, sorry, I look over this way. It's a little bigger. It's my oldness, Todd. So
That's
I
okay, all
apologize.
good.
I'm not being rude and looking away from you. Given where crop prices are and estate, at the ag industry, right? We're hearing that. I was just at the Nebraska Ag Show, and there's a lot of discussions on how to save money and how to what to do for next year or next season. Um, what advice do you have for growers who and farmers who are looking to renew leases, right? If they're on an annual renewal, is there more benefit in crop share, flex lease, continue moving towards a fixed lease? Anything that, anything that you can recommend there? Again, we can help consume and, split and figure bonuses and do all that with our technology. So that certainly helps. But are you seeing more of a trend to one or the other in the industry from a lease agreement standpoint?
I'm not sure. I don't know that I see a trend one way or the other.
Yeah,
And I would say that in general, we try to stay out of those business decisions. And so whether
gotcha.
crop share is better than cash rent, we try to say, hey, that's a business call, right? We
Yeah,
can't recommend that one is better than the other. So we'll leave that to you. And then hopefully everything goes well and you make lots of.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. That's a good answer, actually. That's a really, good answer. And it is, it's a business decision, and it's also a decision that needs to be made with the landowner, right? They may not want that, right? They may not want that as well. So,
Right.
so here's another question, man. They're coming in great now. So thank you for everybody for that. If you have a verbal and you can demonstrate a pattern of how it has worked in the past and the acceptance and payment, and if there is a dispute, is it more enforceable because of past actions?
Um, I guess that's a pretty factual, intensive question there. And so yeah, I'm sure it would depend on all sorts of things. But in general, yes, you could um, tell a judge, hey, this is how we've done it in the past. And so that's how we assumed that it was going to be this year. And if it's oral, the thing is it could really change at any time, right? Based upon
Right,
an oral statement that somebody gives. Uh,
right.
but yeah, if there's I would say that could be helpful if there is a dispute and you're wondering what did the parties really intend, and a judge were to have to analyze that, you could look at past conduct as maybe indicative of what the parties intended.
Okay. Okay. But then just kind of speculative if the night it does the 90-day agreement still hold true with that or not? I mean, because it's just basically he said, she said, or he said, he said, right? Basically
Well,
in that
yeah.
regard.
Yeah, a lot of times the problem with with that, if you've got an oral lease and we're talking about the 90-day notice of renewal, the question is nobody really knows when the lease began. So
Right.
if the law says you have to give notice 90 days before the end of the term, well, did it begin in on March 1st? Did it begin on January 1st? I grew up in Kansas, and
Yep.
so I think we tended to presume that, well, I guess I don't know how it was done back in the day, but since we always planted winter wheat, you might say that the lease would begin when that winter wheat was planted in the fall,
Yeah.
and then end the next year when that milo or corn or beans were harvested. In Indiana, the general presumption is that leases begin March 1 because there's not a whole lot of winter cropping that happens. So,
Right. Right.
but that's not a given, right? I mean,
Right.
the
Yeah, sure.
courts
It
of
changes
dealing,
with where you are in the United States, right? Or in North
yep.
America. Yep. Yep. For sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So here's a good question. So where do the courts usually draw the line between what a lease says and what the operator claim is customary practices? It's a good question.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'll answer it by saying the general rule, and then of course there's a million exceptions to every general rule in the law.
Hmm.
So in general, I would say that a court will say we just want to look at the four corners of the document. So that's the term they use. So
Right.
we look only at what's in that written contract, and that's how we will make our decisions. Now, if there is something that's ambiguous inside the four corners of that contract, then the court will say, how do we figure out what that ambiguity is? How do we figure out what the parties meant? And that's where then they might allow testimony about what is the customary practice in the area or what did you historically do? But if it's clear what's in the document, that's going to always control over any sort of outside evidence outside of the four corners of that document. But that's a great question.
Yeah, that is a good one. Here's another one. Are you seeing like blockchain, immutable ledgers used in agriculture for things like lease compliance, production records, decision authority, or where do you think they will start to matter legally? That's a good question as well.
Yeah, that's probably a question beyond the pay grade of this lawyer because or expertise.
Yeah,
Uh, because I guess from where we sit, we don't see that sort of thing being done, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just not something that comes across the desk of the lawyer.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, the blockchain thing is really an interesting, concept and doing, being able to track everything that's going on that particular lease or land, piece of land as well. And yeah, that's an interesting. We see some of that actually as well. That through the technology that because with Oaken, we our logo is the rings of a tree, right? And so everything in the center, the lease is the center, and everything else kind of builds out around and scales around that. And the ability to we do have customers that are using the technology to put it, we call it light blockchain, put all that information in on that, what was planted on that land, and
Hmm.
like edible beans, for example, to keep track of what everything was sprayed on that. So there is some ability to the lease, and then the what's going on the land, and then having that information in one spot to be able to share it from a blockchain standpoint. But interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose from that standpoint, if you think of it like that, that does certainly exist out there already.
Yeah. But that leads me to a bigger question, and I'm being very naive on this because I don't know. What are there auditable are there auditing mechanisms around leasing, and what are they? Are there, would there be from a legal standpoint the need to be able to audit your leases? And I don't know that. So it's kind of, like I said, it's definitely a naive question. So if it doesn't make sense, I apologize.
Yeah, I guess who would be doing the auditing, or what would they be auditing?
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't know. Would it be, just your, you're making sure the land you have, the payments you have, it's probably more on a financial side or a CPA side, wouldn't it be?
yeah.
Yeah, 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 that would definitely be. Okay.
I mean, I guess at some level, the Farm Services Agency, right, it does keep track of who's leasing land if they want to be eligible for government payments.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
that's maybe a little bit of an audit, you could say.
yeah, yeah, that's good. Um, So, there's a lot of things that go into a lease, and you spelled out, the five or six: owner's correct name, tenant's correct name, description of the property, of course the rent, the 90-day, agreement of cancellation, and then, of course the dates when payments are due, right? And those sort of things. So those were basic, but when you start to think about liabilities on, and here's where I'm going with this question. I have a lot of conversations when we start to upload, the contracts, the leases into our system. They're like, yeah, this is a cash rent deal, but we do all the, let's say the waterway work, and we do all of that. We don't charge. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, honestly, it's because people are so good in ag, they just do
Right.
that kind of thing. And what's your thoughts on that from a legal perspective?
Right. So you're saying like in those instances, the tenant's doing more than just
Yeah.
farming and paying rent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there may be a bonus calculation in there, so maybe there could be like a flex or something like
Yeah.
that. But they're like, we do all the fence work, we do all
Yep.
the waterway work. We just fix it because we want to make sure we maintain a good. I mean, should they be
Right.
capturing? I mean, even though they're not charging it, should they be capturing that in there, or how does it affect both parties, right?
Yeah, I think like where I see that come up is people go the extra mile, right, to make the landowner happy because they
Yeah,
want that long-term commitment.
right,
And then they're surprised when maybe that doesn't equate a long-term commitment because the
right,
landowner ends up leasing to someone else the next year, and they think, "Wow, I did all that fence work for you. I did all these extra things, and then you undercut me by leasing it to someone else." And so I
right.
guess that's where not having that down in a written lease comes back to bite you as the person who did the right thing because
Right.
maybe you would if you put it in a written lease you'd say okay I'll do the fence work but then I need a 5 year commitment on this, right, so that you can get that investment back. The same with you may say if a field needs lime or something that you soil input that you only do once every 5 or 10 years. If I'm the tenant farmer and I'm going to do that, I want to make sure I get the benefit of that for at least 5 or 10 years, right? However long the lease is.
Yeah,
But you see people do that on a 1 year lease and then be upset when it gets leased to somebody else the next year. Uh,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I guess, yeah, if you're going to do those extra things, make sure that you're somehow rewarded for them and not just an ambiguous promise or belief that you're going to keep leasing that land for long term.
That's a great recommendation. Yeah, that's for sure. That makes a lot of sense, right? Just get some credit for it, even though you're doing it out of the back. I mean, that's not your intention. You just still that way. If the land does change hands, they're seeing everything you can do that you're doing on that piece of property, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and that we see that a lot as well with the technology and being able to for information to be put into the land asset portal that growers can create for all these landowners that they're working with. They can actually put a picture. Hey, we didn't charge you for it, but here was an approach to a field that needed a new drain tile or a tile across it or something like that, right? Or here's the fence, right? There's a big washout here. We put some riprap in it for you. No cost, but thanks for doing it. That's the way that, even using like technology like ours, even though it may not be in the contract, they can see those improvements. So there's kind of two ways to skin that cat, I guess, as well. I think it's good to have it in your documentation, but also showing it. So yeah. Here's another question. Do you see any actions by landowners that accidentally get interpreted as consent over time?
Let's think about
Yeah,
that.
I got to think about that one too. Do you see any actions by landowner that accidentally gets interpreted as consent over time? Do you need more information on that? I'm sure Amy would
So,
give us more
well,
info, more
I can
context.
answer, yeah, I can answer the question this way that a typical lease, if you use a form lease, should have a provision in there called a non-waiver provision. And a non-waiver provision says that it's generally favorable towards a landowner or landlord, but that if the tenant does something that is a breach of the lease and the landlord doesn't address it, it's not a waiver of the right to address that issue later on down the road. And so that means, for example, like let's say rent is 30 days late and the landlord doesn't do anything about it. And then the next year it's 30 years or 30 days late and the landlord says, "Well, I'm terminating the lease because you've paid late." And the tenant might say, "Well, I did it last year and you didn't complain, so you've waived that right." But no, if you've got that non-waiver provision in a lease, that would address that issue. So I guess that's how I'll address the question by saying, like, you can address this in your contracts with a non-waiver provision.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, very good. Are there any other questions? We're at that 45-minute mark. I think that's always a sweet spot for these kind of conversations. So if there aren't any burning questions from our audience today, any just kind of final thoughts or final comments? This has been fantastic. I have learned a ton about, you know, um, lease agreements and what to have and what not to have and the watch out. So thank you very much for that, Todd. Any just kind of final thoughts that, maybe one last takeaway for the audience about, what they should know or something that,
Yeah.
you think is important that if you were going to be in a 30 in the elevator and you had, a minute with these folks, what would you want them to tell them about leasing?
I think I would say get a written lease, and there are forms out there available online you can find. And Also, it probably doesn't cost a lot to have an attorney just review a lease, but it's amazing how rarely we are asked to review one on the front end.
Yeah.
But we are often asked to review them on the back end when something goes wrong. And so, sometimes an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. And um, the way land prices are going now and cash rents are going now, um, it's not a small amount of money anymore. So maybe it makes sense to pay a lawyer, a few hundred or $1,000 to review a lease to ensure that you've got it locked down for the future.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you for that. That was good advice. Um, Todd, I can't thank you enough from all of us at Oaken and all of our participants today. Just a fantastic conversation, and you can see what kind of a guy this is who just comes on and just gives this kind of information, for you. If you need of Todd's services, He's on LinkedIn. His website again is www.aglaw.us. You can certainly find information out there. Make sure you go out. I'm going to do it. Go out and check that ag data transparency project that he leads. Fantastic work there. And you probably don't get this enough, but thank you for all the work you do for agriculture, right? That means a lot to the industry, and we got to work together to make sure we keep this industry vibrant and healthy and profitable, right? So a lot of people in the world is dependent on it. But again, thank you for your time. And if you want more information on what we do at Oaken or do a demo, you can go to oaken.ag and find that information out on our company as well. So again, thank you for your time today, and appreciate everybody calling in.
Thanks, Ron.
Yep, thank you, Todd.